stress, anxiety, and factors affecting performance. Arousal. The term arousal is defined as the intensity of behaviour, which refers to the degree of emotional energy that is felt in different situations. Arousal is connected to the energy or state that drives a person to either learn or perform. If the body gets put under stress, then the level of arousal in the body increases, and we are motivated to behave in a way which will help these arousal levels reduce back down to the optimum level of arousal. There are two branches of arousal: somatic arousal / physiological, and cognitive arousal / psychological arousal. The somatic arousal relates to the changing state of the body, for example, the heart rate increasing or the breathing rate increasing, while cognitive relates to the mind. So, for example, the emotions, so the moment-to-moment changes in worry or negative thoughts. Arousal can have a positive or negative effect on performance depending on how much arousal you're experiencing. This is because under/over-aroused can cause your concentration to either wander, and so you're not focused, under-aroused, or to be narrowed so that you miss environmental cues and your performance will drop. However, if you have optimum levels of arousal, then your concentration will be just right to be able to absorb information that will help your performance, such as these environmental cues. There are three theories that try to explain the link between arousal and sports performance. These are drive theory, inverted U theory, and the catastrophe theory. Drive theory. Drive theory suggests that there is a relationship between arousal levels and performance levels. It suggests that the increase in arousal levels is proportional to an increase in the quality of performance levels. However, the theory says that the quality of this performance depends on how well the performer has learned/knows the skill. This is because when arousal is evident, the dominant response, which is the motor program, skill that is already learned, will emerge. Therefore, this theory suggests that you don't want to put novice learners in high arousal states because they won't be able to perform the skill, whereas high-level performers will be able to perform. For example, if someone is a novice, low skill level juggler, then they'll be able to juggle in a low arousal environment because they can focus fully on the skill and don't have any added pressure. Whereas if they're in a high arousal environment, such as with lots of people around and watching them, then they won't be able to juggle properly because the dominant behaviour is likely to produce a mistake-ridden performance. Criticisms. A criticism of this theory is that it doesn't explain for when the experts, high skill level, get a skill wrong. For example, a professional footballer missing a penalty. This is because the theory suggests that if you're a high-level performer, when you're in a high arousal environment, your dominant response will emerge, which in this case would be to do the skill correctly and fluently. Therefore, this theory doesn't explain how and why experts sometimes get things wrong. The inverted U theory, similarly to the drive theory, suggests that as arousal levels increase, so too does the quality of performance. However, this increase in quality of performance only happens up to a maximum point. This happens at what is called the optimum arousal zone. After the arousal levels have increased past this optimum zone, into what is called the over-arousal zone, or they drop below the optimum zone, into the under-arousal zone, then the quality of performance will drop. Under-arousal. Concentration levels drop when your attention starts to wander to unwanted cues. Therefore, in these circumstances, the process of selective attention cannot take place, and so there will be an overload of information in your brain, which will then prevent any accurate decision-making taking place. For example, if you're juggling, then you may be focused on something else, which would mean you are no longer concentrating the balls, and so you drop them. Optimum arousal. The perfect state in which maximum potential performance is reached. This is because the attention field adjusts the ideal width, and so the performer is able to concentrate fully on the activity. As this concentration is high, important information can be taken in by your brain, and so accurate and correct decisions can be made. For example, if you are juggling 3 balls and you had optimal arousal levels, you'll be most likely to catch the balls as you have good levels of focus, as well as a good level of motivation to perform well due to the arousal levels you are experiencing. Over-arousal. Concentration field narrows, which causes the performer to possibly miss some of the environmental cues. This means the performer's selective attention cannot operate, and the capacity of concentration becomes obstructed. This causes the performer to go into a blind panic. This nervousness level is called hypervigilance. For example, if you're juggling 3 balls and you're over-aroused, you may miss cues which would prevent you from catching all of the balls. Criticisms. A criticism of this theory is that it is unlikely that when the arousal levels surpass the zone of optimal arousal, the quality of performance gradually and smoothly decreases, but instead it is more likely that we'll see a sharp decrease. Another criticism is that it suggests that the peak quality of performance for everyone happens at the same point of arousal, where for some it may be higher than for others. For example, someone such as Cristiano Ronaldo always performs better in the bigger games when the arousal levels are higher compared to someone who is a low-level footballer, who may perform better when there are no fans around and the arousal levels are lower. Catastrophe theory. The catastrophe theory suggests that performance levels increase with arousal up until a point where something goes wrong. The catastrophe point, and from this point, performance levels take a sharp drop in quality. Following this, performance levels drop further down. An example of this is Jonathan Woodgate's debut for Real Madrid. His catastrophe point was when after just coming off Madrid, he stepped down to block a shot, but the ball ended up skimming off his head and into his own net. From here it only got worse, as he was given a yellow card in the 66th minute. And then in the 66th minute he was booked again and given his marching orders. However, sometimes performance levels can be recovered after the catastrophe point up to an average level of performance. An example of this is making a mistake in football, such as gifting the ball to the other team, where they then go on to score. But after this happens, the player continues to play and ends up assisting a goal, which ends up with their team winning the game. Criticisms. A criticism of this theory is that it always suggests that if the performance levels are recovered after the catastrophe point, they always return to a point below the optimum performance levels. However, this is not always the case, as sometimes the performance levels could return straight to optimum level performance. For example, if a goalkeeper gave away a penalty, then this would be the catastrophe point. But if they then saved this penalty, then their performance levels have gone straight back to optimum performance. Anxiety. The term anxiety is defined as a negative experience of stress and can be caused by worry or apprehension, perhaps due to the fear of failing in a competitive situation. There are two types of anxiety. These are somatic anxiety, which links to the physical components, so the sweaty hands, blood pressure increases, and etc. This is triggered by the cognitive anxiety, and you usually have low levels of this leading up to the situation, but they increase shortly before the situation starts. And the second type is cognitive anxiety, which links to the thought process. So, for example, the worrying fear of negative evaluation of performance, and etc. And this usually occurs as the situation approaches, such as ours before. However, it doesn't occur just before the situation. Alongside these two types of anxiety, there is also a second dimension that relates to the stability of anxiety. Trait anxiety, which is the part of the personality that is stable. This is the natural state of anxiety you experience in all given situations. And state anxiety, which is the temporary emotion to a situation. The state of anxiety you experience depending on the given situations. If you have a high trait anxiety, it means you are more likely to experience high levels of anxiety in any given situation. An example of trait anxiety could be, if you were to take part in 4 sporting situations, you had to note down your anxiety levels on a scale of 1 to 10 after being told what sporting situation you would be taking part in all 4 goes. If all your scores were consistent across the 4 sporting situations, for example, all being close to 10 or all being close to 1, then you have trait anxiety. If you have state anxiety, it means that you're more likely to experience high levels of anxiety in competitive situations compared to other situations. However, some people are able to deal with this anxiety and remain calm, where others, which can include some experts, can't deal with it and become extremely stressed. An example of state anxiety could be, if you were to take part in 4 sporting situations and you had to note down your anxiety levels on a scale of 1 to 10 after being told what sporting situation you'll be taking part in for all 4 goes. If your scores are all different to each other going from situation to situation, for example a score of 2 for taking a penalty in football, but a score of 8 for playing in a netball match, then you have state anxiety. Some of the factors that can affect the level of anxiety you have in competitive situations include a fear of failure / making mistakes, a fear of evaluation, the fear of crowd, the fear of competition importance, fear of injury or danger, the fear of being punished, a lack of control of the opposition referee or pitch, the type of task involved, the threat to self-esteem, and the threat of letting others down. The way we can test to see how much of an impact on performance anxiety has on you is by taking a SCAT, Sport Competition Anxiety Test. This is a test which measures the anxiety of a performer by asking you a series of questions based on your feelings before a sporting situation. The results that are achieved from these tests are closely linked to the level of state anxiety that a performer gets before sporting competition. Both of these parameters for anxiety, trait or state anxiety, can have effects on the performance of an athlete during a sporting situation. For example, if you had a high trait anxiety, the effect of this on performance will be a negative one. The because you'll be extremely anxious and will try to avoid making mistakes so that you aren't judged by the team around you, and therefore you always play the safe option and may not be fully concentrated in the game, but rather more concentrated on making sure you don't make mistakes you can't be moaned at. Alongside this, if you had a high trait anxiety as well as state anxiety in competitive scenarios, then your anxiety would increase further if you were in this situation. This would have a negative effect on the performance of an athlete, as it would cause you to become hotter, and so when you're competing, because your body temperature is already higher, it will mean that you won't be able to push your body as hard because there is less space for your body's temperature to increase. Furthermore, anxiety could cause you to think of the worst possible scenario, for example, bad injury, and you may be extremely cautious, such as not going into challenges, which could eventually lead to you losing the game. This is linked to the catastrophe theory, because if you avoid making a challenge, which then leads to the opposition scoring, this would be the catastrophe point, and so your performance would just decrease further from there. There are multiple techniques to help you manage your anxiety. These are split into two categories, which are the somatic anxiety management, which relates to the physical symptoms, for example, deep breathing and physical preparation, which is the warm-up, and the cognitive anxiety management, which relates to thought process and feelings, for example, meditation and mental rehearsal. These anxiety management techniques can help the performer to control their anxiety, and therefore recreate situations in which a performer feels confident in their ability and regain their focus on their performance. An example of a somatic anxiety management technique is to do deep breathing, which can be done at any time before competitive situations such as a game, or can be done during breaks in these situations, for example when the ball has gone out of playing football. This technique is done by simply taking large breaths in and then holding them for a few seconds before slowly releasing and then repeat this action. The reason this is beneficial to controlling your physical symptoms of anxiety is because when you take these deep breaths, it means that more oxygen is coming into the bloodstream, and so less blood will be needed to be pumped around the body to get enough oxygen to the muscles, and so the heart rate can decrease. It can also be beneficial for the mental side of anxiety, as it allows for you to just take a minute to regain your composure and concentration. An example of a cognitive anxiety management technique is to do mental rehearsal, which can be done at any time prior to the competitive situation, such as a game situation. This is because it involves you thinking out the outcome you want to happen during the situation to effectively try to persuade your mind into believing it is going to happen, and so it will give you a positive outlook and feeling towards the game.